Hi, everyone coming in. Happy Friday, Friday the 13th. Happy to be here. We only had, you know, five, six, seven issues with our tech check, but we made it. Um,
Yes,
and
we
I'm
did.
so happy we made it because we got a lot of folks who registered today to, engage in a discussion about ChatGPT. And generative AI and instructional AI and a little bit of Packback. So, welcome, friends and family of Packback, friends and family of Packback. Go ahead if you don't mind. Everyone, as you're logging in the chat, go ahead and put your name, perhaps your institution, if you are an instructor at an institution, your role, and then what brought you here today to this webinar. Want to be able to say who's in there. So thank you so much for joining us. Today, we are going to talk about the role of instructional AI in education. Happy Friday. I know a lot of us are looking forward to a long weekend. So today with me, I have the wonderful Danyelle O'Brien. So Danyelle, would you mind introducing yourself and then just why you're excited to chat today with me about ChatGPT?
Absolutely. Thank you, Kelsey. I'm Danyelle O'Brien, the Director of Online Learning at Alfred State College. We are a rural college in West New York. So for us, this is actually an exciting time, right? To have a piece of technology that's going to challenge us to think differently about assignments and how we engage with students. And also, I don't know that it's as scary as we initially think it is when we hear about it. So Kelsey and I will talk a little bit more about that, but I'm really happy to be here. Thank you all. And I'm seeing people from all over the country. So thanks for joining.
Yeah, amazing. Well, again, thanks everyone for coming. Thank you, Danielle, for joining. It's been wonderful to get to know you. My name is Kelsey Behringer. I'm the COO here at Packback. I started my career as a high school chemistry and physics teacher, so definitely experienced firsthand just how impactful academic dishonesty could be and how scary that can be, and just what that feels like to have to battle, but then also try to work against it and make sure that our students are given the proper autonomy, the proper purpose, and then also just the proper skills to actually complete assignments, and then making sure my assignments are engaging for them. So I'm excited to talk about all of that. If I had to describe the past few weeks, it's been obsessed with ChatGPT for sure. So I'm just so happy to be able to have discussions that I've been having with people like you. So welcome today. What we're going to do is talk a little bit about just what ChatGPT is. If you have yet to interact with it, I'll show you a bit how the program works. We're going to talk about preventing misuse of the platform. So some advice for instructors. We're going to talk about instructional AI with Packback. We're going to talk about evolving alongside ChatGPT and then end with a Q&A. So to get started, if you have not yet experienced ChatGPT, I would highly recommend you create an account. Unfortunately, right now, ChatGPT is at capacity, so I won't be able to live demo it, but put it on your calendar to try to get in there and play around with it, and then also see what ways you can use it for your own benefit, modify maybe an assignment or modify a lesson plan for an accommodation. That's a way in which someone on our team has used it. But what ChatGPT really is a large language model. GPT itself stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer. That's that LLM there. What folks at OpenAI did, the company that owns ChatGPT, is fed, GPT millions, trillions, billions, I said that in the wrong succession, pieces of data. And then what it's able to do is use a statistical model to predict what's next in a series of words and extrapolate that into whole, paragraphs or short essays. So a great example of this in action is this sentence right here. Not all heroes wear capes. In all of the data that it's been fed, 80% of the time it sees those pieces of text, capes will follow. And that's exactly how this works. It is the statistically likely next word in a string of words. It's not super Google, right? And there's no human sitting behind it. One of my colleagues says we have to remind ourselves there's no wizard behind ChatGPT. It is really cool and a lot of wonder, but it's just not a human at the end of the day. It's a statistical model. Now, the way that I've been using ChatGPT has been very scattered. Like I said, I really think the platform is quite amazing and really helpful. I've used it to write emails, I've used it to write thank you notes, and screenshot that it's coming from ChatGPT. And I think that adds a little bit of quirk to it. So I sent it to my colleagues. But this is an example of, hey, I'm looking for some, cocktail recipes. What do you have for me? And I highlight this right here because it's a really great example of how the output of ChatGPT can feel very personal and trick us into thinking that it's magic when it's really just, when things exist in pieces of text that give recipes or give lists, they tend to sign off with some sort of personal message like this. Now, what has made ChatGPT this phenomenon that it is that it is a chat interface that's highly engaging and easy to use. So this was my first output when I went ahead and fed it a query, which is, I want to make a winter cocktail. I gave it another input, which is, give me a more detailed recipe for winter sangria with measurements. And I got a more specific output that was more so what I was looking for, right? So want to get everyone in the mindset of, the more thoughtful we are with our inputs, the better the outputs we're going to get. So I want to pause briefly and talk about the reactions that I've been seeing in academia. It's been about a month now since I found out about ChatGPT and started using it and stalking social media for, reactions to it inside and outside of academia. And I'm really honestly quite pleased that I will say I've seen the sentiment shift from immediate alarm, which was totally warranted because students do struggle with academic dishonesty. And this is just yet another thing potentially for us to worry about. So definitely valid and warranted to have that initial reaction. But what I'm starting to see is folks having more conversations, reading more content, and realizing if I make my assessment strong, students will probably not be able to pass with this as it currently exists. And if I grow and evolve alongside it, I'll probably be ahead of the curve as far as high quality educators and high quality education. So here's some examples of those reactions we've been seeing. We've been seeing oral exams, time to pick up pen and paper, we're going to be writing in class. We've seen folks say, hey, not quite smart. Most folks have lost the ability to write for long periods of times, especially during COVID when we were fully remote and fully virtual. And then we've seen folks say, hey, let's go ahead and use ChatGPT to support students who maybe have disabilities. Maybe this is the answer to true equity in education. With that, I want to pause and ask you, Danyelle, when did you learn about ChatGPT and what were your initial thoughts?
Sure. Yeah. It was actually really interesting. So one of our faculty walked up to me one day and said, hey, have you heard about this OpenAI ChatGPT thing? And I was like, no, but tell me more. And next thing I know, I found myself down the rabbit hole, right, of trying to figure out how does this work and what is it and what does it mean, right, for our faculty here and faculty at large. So I love that, first of all, that our faculty come and they're like, I know something, do you know about it? Which is great. But that prompted me to really jump in and learn a lot more about it. So of course, yeah, at first you're like, oh my goodness, what are we going to do? This just changes the landscape of higher ed, right? Mm-hmm. But I really think that initial reaction has changed, and really it hasn't, like it launched in November, right? So it's really been a pretty short timeline that I think we're getting to the point where we understand more that, like you were talking about, the next statistically likely word, which does not mean the correct word, right? So I think it's really important that to educate our students too about how it works, and that if it may not be worth even trying to cheat with it, right? Because it's giving you a statistical probability, not necessarily a correct answer. Like Google, you're probably going to get a more correct answer. Whereas ChatGPT, you have to ask it a series of questions to really hone in and probably get to that correct answer, which is great for critical thinking, right? So there's so much opportunity if we teach our students how it works and how to use it to be a tool. So I think it's still a little scary. There's
Mhm.
definitely going to be some, I think, challenges, right? And I put in the chat, I see a lot of folks with writing heavy courses, some ethical courses. So those are the perfect places to have some of these conversations and open Pandora's box, let them play with it, but let them analyze it and let them see that it's not perfect, because trying to hide it, I feel like they're just going to want to use it more if we make it this mysterious thing. So yeah, so I think from very scared and unsure to now I think a little more understanding and seeing it as a huge tool that could be used in classrooms.
Yeah, absolutely. Your answer reminds me a lot of instructors who have courses that naturally lend themselves to some difficult concepts and some difficult discussion topics, right?
Mhm.
Um, that might naturally lead to some heated debate or some, misagreements amongst our students. And I have seen some instructors say, "Oh, I really just want to stay away from that topic because I know I'm going to have an uncomfortable experience in my classroom or maybe in my online discussions." And then what happens is, I think over time, folks realize, or some people just, folks start with, I just need to have those discussions because if I don't, they're going to happen anyway, but
Mhm.
maybe they'll happen outside of this academic setting where students have these academic guidelines to stay civil, and I'm there to help facilitate. So I'd say
Yeah.
similar, it's, are we going to say, no, let's ban chat GPT, or are we going to say, hey, why don't we actually use this as a learning environment and learn how to use the tool, right? I love that
Absolutely.
concept.
Yes. Yep. And I mean, another thing, right, is that
Hmm.
the data that was loaded in was really from 2001.
Hmm.
So any current event that happened in 2002, you'll probably get an answer that says, "Oh, I don't know much about that," or "I don't really know what happened on that date, but I can tell you about what happened in the past." So if you're really, asking your students about current events, ChatGPT doesn't necessarily have the knowledge base to answer those questions either. And it
Hmm.
does avoid controversial topics. So I
Yes.
started asking it some questions about politics, about different wars, about things that historically have been controversial. And it just says, "I'm sorry, I don't discuss that."
Hmm.
Which is also kind of interesting, and why, right? That's a conversation to have with our students.
Yeah.
Creating a tool and then kind of preventing it from having certain conversations.
Yeah, that's a great question to ask students. Why do you think ChatGPT does that? And they can hop into the ethics of AI, and maybe that's an intentional decision to make it seem less human, right?
Right.
Well, speaking of safeguarding existing assignments, and I will state that I don't love the term safeguarding because it feels a little like this term that I've heard a lot of folks use of an arms race, right? We get a new tech and then we get we get more protective. Really what this is about, I think, is strengthening our existing assignments, because some assignments, if you do have 400 students in your course, it's going to be really hard to make them chat GPT safe. But if you have a writing class where you are grading essays, or you have a reflection exercise where you truly read content, there are small changes you can make to your assignment to make it so that it's just not worth students' time to use this platform, or it just would not get a solid grade. So let's talk a little bit about that. The first thing I want to point out is that because ChatGPT is a statistical model, it is not looking at the web, right? It's not in the background going to Google and finding a literary, article or a journal to cite in its research. That's just not what it's doing. So if you ask students to cite sources and they go to ChatGPT and they ask ChatGPT to generate sources, ChatGPT will generate a fake source that just looks really pretty, right? It'll say Smith, comma, this year, right? It'll give these in-text citations that don't actually exist. They don't go anywhere. So if you really want to make sure students do the work that is necessary to acquire the course objective, to acquire that knowledge, to make sure they understand the course material, have them cite sources, and just make sure you're reviewing the sources cited at the end of the, in their bib and their work cited, to make sure that these are good quality sources and not just made up out of nowhere. Second is, as you were saying, ChatGPT is not going to formulate a point of view. It's not going to say one way or the other. It's going to give information about a general topic. So have students formulate a point of view, and also that's what students want to do. They want to talk about how the course concepts apply to their own lives. And that's how I felt in grad school. I would much rather complete a writing assignment that forced me to talk about my unique experience in the classroom rather than read some really dense paper that I had a hard time understanding or getting through, right? That's an assignment that I wanted to do. And I would have spent more time trying to train ChatGPT to give me a good answer than just writing it myself. Uh, Second is, or third, let's focus on the process of learning and make the assignment more about the process and less about the product. So maybe that's having them document their workflow of a writing assignment. So the writing assignment itself could be really short and sweet. If you're in a marketing class, you could say, write a strong email with this purpose, and the email's really short and sweet, but then what they're doing is documenting their process of the actual assignment completion. Have students reflect on what's happening in the course if you do meet in real life, because ChatGPT was not in the attendance there, many attendance of your course. And then this idea came from our Chief Product Officer, Jess Tenuta, which do this reverse research paper, give students the conclusion or the thesis statement and have them go do the research to back it up and have them write the paper that supports a thesis. We asked some of our internal team members, what writing assignments did you do in your, whether it was higher ed journey or even K-12 journey that just wouldn't have been able to ace with the use of ChatGPT, even with editing. And these were the most common themes that came up. So I'll highlight some answers here. Predicting the future, to your point, Danyelle, it's not really going to get there with much depth. The second is reflecting on field experience and collected data. That's going to be a really great way. So if there's any way that you could ask students to go do something, maybe you're in a marketing or a selling course, you can have them go ask for something for free and then write about the experience. They have to talk about their specific data collection. And lastly is just really specific. The more specific the assignment, doesn't necessarily need to be the same for every student, but the more specific it is, the harder it's going to be to utilize something like this or really just not have to do a ton of research. Danyelle, I'd love to hear about your thoughts on strengthening or modifying writing assignments as we go into the spring term, and maybe what advice you're giving the faculty that you work with.
Sure, absolutely. I think a big part of it is that reflection piece that you were talking about earlier, and having faculty think about what is it that you really want your students to get out of that writing assignment. So in some courses, it's the process of writing, right? We want them to go through the creative process to create their thesis statement, to find supporting information, and then to be able to build their argument around it. In other courses, we really want them to demonstrate that they can research, right? Or that they have the ability to put an outline together or a memo together. So depending on what you really want them to get out of it, I think that kind of reframes how you may or may not be able to incorporate something like one of these AI tools into your course. And so I think that the purpose of the assignment is really important, right? What do we really want them to get out of it? And then how do we help them understand that and maybe have the candid conversation, right? This is a composition class. It's freshman comp. You need to write, right? So if you use ChatGPT to write, you're not engaging in the process of writing. So then how do we incorporate activities in our classroom that help them to analyze what good writing is, what the process is? So we might have them, okay, your homework is to go to ChatGPT, have it write you 2 paragraphs about a particular topic, and then bring it to class. And in class, we're going to talk about these series of paragraphs, and you can ask this tool the same question and get different answers almost every time. So it's not, you're going to have a class of 15 people that may have 15 different answers that it got from the same tool. So now we can talk about how not everyone, writes the same way, how there's different writing styles, how depending on the questions that they asked or the follow-up questions that they asked, they would come to different conclusions in the way that things were written. And then there's always punctuation, grammar, right? Those things that we can analyze. So rather than making it a scary thing that we're telling them don't use it, if we give them opportunities to use it and analyze it and help them see that it's not perfect, I think in our midterms, our finals, our, bigger papers, then we have some of that opportunity that maybe they won't try, or they will know how to leverage it in a way that isn't necessarily cheating, right? It's helping them scaffold their writing. It's helping them to really see these are gaps that I have, or this is something that I need support on. So really going back to the goal of that assignment, figuring out how we can either use it as a tool in the class or help students understand why it may not actually be, a silver bullet for them.
Yeah. I think that's such a great point too, because personally, I've never been a very strong or confident writer. I was always very strong in STEM, right? I was in AP chemistry. I was not in any sort of AP lit class. And that's why I taught chemistry and physics. I love science. And when I think about now in my career, I do a lot of writing. The generation of content is not hard for me. I can write. I have a lot of thoughts. I'm an opinionated person. I'm a passionate person. What's really challenging for me is the editing. Was this concise? Did this have a single thesis or maybe two main arguments? And did my text and my content support it? And I have a feeling that a lot of students are like me. They can get their thoughts out on paper if they have a really strong assignment prompt, which is one thing you had mentioned is, do they have good assignment instructions, right? And maybe the piece they struggle with most is actually the editing process. So maybe every once in a while, whether it's, hey, go on ChatGPT and get an output and edit it. Maybe it's you just give them a C-level paper and ask them to edit, or a D-level paper. Maybe that's part of this concept, is that we're actually now being forced to rethink about how we ask students to get better at writing and composition. So I love that as a thought. Thank you. I always love having these conversations, Danyelle.
I'm just reading what Stephen just put in the chat. So it looks like ChatGPT would do pretty good on the bar exams. But I think that's a good thing to point out. A lot of the things that it's really good at are factual, right? So historically, how did this work, or how did this function? Because it's looking at that next most likely word, it's not great at formulating its own ideas, critical thinking, right? Those kinds of things. So it would make sense that on some standardized exams that are asking questions that are a little more, like the information's probably out there somewhere about how you should answer questions related to law or business or your GMATs, right?
Oh yeah, 100%.
So it makes sense that it would do pretty well on those kinds of things, which is why it's more and more important to ask those higher level questions and those things that we know are going to get the students applying and thinking about how do things actually interact, because that's where it struggles.
Absolutely, 100%. So I want to pivot to talk a little bit about what Packback is and instructional AI. But before I do that, I want to actually take a step back entirely. And what I'm assuming brought a lot of folks into the webinar today and the webinar series as a whole, and these discussions, and probably is taking them to Twitter or Reddit to read threads, is the concept of academic dishonesty. That's why this is a bit of a phenomenon in education right now. It's a very cool piece of technology. We're seeing something that comes up once a decade, really. I akin this to the creation of the internet or the creation of the calculator. But why we're all talking about this now very urgently is academic dishonesty, because we do need students to do their own work to be successful after college, or after high school and be college ready, or after high school and be career ready. Whatever the path is, they need to learn to write and critically think. And if they are truly misusing ChatGPT, that is going to be a problem. So taking that step back, I want to just talk a little bit about why students cheat and make sure that every single person really understands, why are they cheating? What is the motivation for students to be academically dishonest on purpose? Because obviously sometimes students cheat because they don't know they're cheating. So Danyelle, at your institution and your experience, what is the answer to this question?
Yeah, it's rarely because I want to, right? students find themselves, or maybe sometimes put themselves, because of choices, right, in positions where it's crunch time. They realized I should have taken a week to write something, and now I only have a few hours because it's due at midnight, especially in online, right? Because it's really easy to kind of forget you're not going to class Monday, Wednesday, Friday. There's not a faculty member necessarily reminding you about something daily. So announcements, emails, those kinds of things are effective, but I think students find themselves on Sundays saying, oh no, I was supposed to write a 3-page paper and now I have to do it in a couple hours. So that's to cheat, or to, even just try to collect and put things together and be like, yeah, that's my own thoughts, right? So I really don't think that it's usually from a place of deviance, right? Or a place of trying to deceive a faculty member. Our students, at least here, it's usually they found themselves in a situation and they were trying to be successful. They were trying to get out of it. Or maybe they weren't doing well in the class, right? So they know that their grades aren't strong. So they're trying to find an alternative way to boost those grades. And this seems like an easy way to maybe get a B instead of a D. And that's usually the trend, in a lot of research of why students cheat. It's not because they want, like, oh, I just want to cheat, and right. It's because they're trying to find a path to reach a goal that they've realized there may be, not those two things aren't syncing up right now.
Absolutely, 100%. And I think the reason why so many instructors have had really strong reactions is because we're just kind of, I think, getting back on even footing after COVID. And I know what I've heard from instructors at more traditional, 4-year universities that have students, in the ages of 18 to 22, is that they did not really develop much executive functioning skills in the latter half of their high school career. They definitely didn't get strong enough writing and communication skills if they were behind Zoom for a year and not, forced to interact with peers, or maybe do as much work as they should have been doing in their class time. So we are seeing the effects of that, and we are going to have to work harder to address them. And all of that weight shouldn't fall on the faculty shoulders. That needs to be evenly distributed, right? Of everyone who supports education as a whole. And I think about my own personal experience in the classroom when my students were cheating, and what cheating looked like in my classroom is, looking at the paper next to them during an exam. It's because they did not know the answer to the question, or all of the questions. They did not have the mastery necessary to actually perform well on the assessment. So what is the risk in cheating? I'm going to fail it anyway, was the mindset. And I think that's what you're getting to as well, is we have a lot of these students. It's, what's the risk? It's only upside for me at this point. With that, I want to introduce a pedagogical theory that we utilize in our platform here at Packback, which is self-determination theory. And I actually think it's a really pertinent theory for anything, whether it's your own personal goal attainment or your professional life. If you have these three, areas kind of figured out, you are going to be intrinsically motivated. So that's exactly what self-determination theory is do students feel purpose, or do people feel purpose in what they're doing? Do they feel autonomy, like they have choice? And do they have some form of mastery? And if all of these three things are complete, or they are achieved, or they're present in a learning experience, in a professional experience, in a personal experience, you will have intrinsic motivation, which is, I am doing the thing because I want to do it, not because I'm being told to do it. And I'm just going to say that in my own experience as a human being who very much feels intrinsically motivated, I won't cheat because I feel intrinsically motivated, because I have stake and because I have pride in what I want to do. And so when we're thinking about our assignments and we're thinking about our students, are assignments giving them some form of purpose? Is it giving them connectedness to the subject matter? And are we properly giving them purpose and connectedness to the subject matter in our assignments? Autonomy. Am I giving my students some form of choice or a voice in this course? And think about your own personal life. when you're micromanaged versus when you have a little bit of wiggle room to function autonomously, how much different you feel about your career and if you want to stay in that career or at that, position. And then last is mastery. My students were cheating because they did not know what they were doing. And, failure, people will persevere and persist through failure. But at some point, students will give up if all they feel is failure. They need to feel some wins. They need to feel like they have some scaffolding in order to persist. This is what Packback is based off of. This is our pedagogical foundation. Now, we definitely utilize other theories out there, Bloom's taxonomy. But what Packback is as a whole is a all-in-one platform for writing and discussion. Packback Questions, I joke, is our firstborn child. It's been around for quite some years. It is our formative assessment, our discussion platform. This is where students are going to engage weekly or biweekly in self-guided learning experiences. So what's going to happen is students are going to be asking the questions and Packback questions, and then answering their peers' questions. What we want instructors to then do is save a little bit of time managing discussion, like wholly, you're not reading every single post, and retool some of that saved time so that you're actually connecting with students in a way that makes them feel really connected to the subject matter. There's nothing better than getting a piece of praise from your instructor after you posted a question you spent 30 minutes putting together. Packback Deep Dives is our brand new writing platform. I can tell you that, after years of working with instructors with Packback Questions, they kept asking, hey, we just do our writing assignments and Packback students get all of this great feedback as they type. And so we delivered. Instructors needed a tool to help students get more in-time feedback and force them into the writing lab. And they needed help grading. And so we built Packback Deep Dives. We have a feedback tool called Packback Instruct that can be added on. And these tools can be adopted together and kind of your holistic writing discussion platform, or separately if you just want to focus on outside asynchronous discussion or just your writing assignments. I'm going to briefly show what some of these tools look like. So here's an example of what it looks like when a student asks a question on Packback. Most often students ask one question per week or biweekly is the common requirement. What they're doing is they are getting feedback as they type. You'll see that on the right. They're getting feedback on the open-endedness of their question, because of course we want our questions to spark thorough discussion and not just be able to be answered by ChatGPT, right? We want students to cite sources. So ideally the first step in writing a question is finding something in the class or online that engages you or connects you to the course concepts. And then they are going to get feedback on their writing and their grammar and mechanics as well as their, formatting and communication style. So they're getting this feedback as they type. And if you think about this, if a paper or a final writing assignment is the game, these are all the practices where they're not being assessed for how well they played, but they have time to prepare before that big game. Now, you're probably wondering, where does AI come into this? What Packback is aiming to do with AI is teach students to fish. So we're going to give them feedback as they type. We are not going to generate content for them. So you can think of tech like ChatGPT being generative AI and technology like Packback being instructional AI. We want to give students the tools they need to generate better content. AI also comes in other places. AI is going to actually review every single post that's submitted by a student, and it's going to review it for things like close-endedness, plagiarism, AI-generated text, which I will come back to, sufficient length, class logistics, profanity, basically anything that's non-academic. Our AI will be looking for that. And if our AI does flag something, it goes through a human review process so that students are never being moderated because an AI. We want to use that as kind of a first step before a human review. And if students are moderated, what happens is they're posted just temporarily unpublished from the feed. They're given an opportunity to resubmit for full credit. So this is truly a learning process. They can technically get moderated a few times before the deadline, so they're able to learn but not fail. They don't have to learn through failure. I'm going to pause here. Danyelle, you have experience working directly with Packback Questions, kind of adjacent to Packback Questions. What's been your experience working with the tool, and what do some of your faculty say about their experience?
Yeah, absolutely. Any of our faculty who have used it are big supporters and proponents on our campus. I think there were some lessons learned though, right? So our nursing faculty really took to it. They embraced the whole concept of students generating questions, citations being required, and they saw almost instant increases in the awesomeness of their student posts. They were what they'd been looking for years, right? But they just couldn't quite get their students there. So that immediate feedback piece, I think, is what's really cool, and what our students and our faculty both have said that they really like about it. Because when a student is typing their discussion board post at 8 o'clock at night or 6 o'clock in the morning, there's not a faculty member available really, usually, even if they did have a question. So to get that automatic feedback, they can see, these are places that you might want to work on. Could you expand here? Is there a citation for this? Those kinds of prompts help the students actually develop really high quality posts, which then leads to much better discussion, right, throughout the thread.
Mhm.
So that's been really awesome. We also had some faculty who gave it a try in a pilot, and they were a little more hesitant to fully embrace the students asking the questions and the prompts. And they loved the tool. They did have higher quality of responses and everything from the students, but they said when they do it next time, they're going to make their questions even more open-ended and like really leave it in the students' hands to make those questions. So I think it was great, right? We had faculty who had awesome experiences right out of the gate. We have others who are kind of learning using the tool, and they all like it. So it's been really successful.
Yeah, I love that too. And I hear that often of, if folks do have a rocky first experience with Packback, it's usually because the change is hard to go through, especially because our job is to ensure that they are educated with the correct information and with proper guidelines. And what you're doing with Packback is you're relinquishing some of that control over what they're talking about, and, how wide their scope can go of their questions and discussion. And it's scary. And anything worth doing usually starts with a lot of change, but I mean, change is scary. So I love that note of, hey, maybe it's time we look back and just really lean in and change, whether that's Packback or whether it's just something else I'm considering in my course. Maybe it's time to make that change. Absolutely. And I would be remiss if I didn't speak a little bit about our new writing platform, Deep Dives, that I've been just absolutely blown away with. It came to fruition as a concept in early 2021. It was in front of 17,000 students, 14,000 students, I should know this, in a beta this fall with about 200 instructors piloting it in a beta. And this spring will be the first public release of the platform. So we have, students registering on Deep Dives today. Some instructors use questions and deep dives together in their course, where their questions assignment is weekly. It's about 15% of the grade or more. And then all of their writing assignments on deep dives. And of course, I would say most writing assignments are anywhere within that 5 to 15% window each. So a good portion of the grade is on Packback. Students get kind of familiar as they go, and I think get stronger at implementing the feedback. Or some folks just do discussion questions because they have large 500-person courses, or they just use deep dives because most of their course is this writing that does need to be graded for content and ideas by the instructor. This is a great example of instructional versus generative AI. So what we're doing in Packback Deep Dives is providing inline feedback, right? We're providing very specific feedback to students writing. What we want to do is reduce the benefit of cheating. If I am getting so much feedback in the system, I know where to start because the rubric is right there in front of me, and I'm going to get this space to do my research, and it's going to help me cite my sources. It's almost at that point just like not worth it to take the risk of cheating, right? And we want to make students feel so confident in this space that they don't even think about cheating. Cheating is irrelevant, and the concept of detecting cheating is irrelevant. So they're going to get feedback on things like narrative voice. Is it consistent? They're going to get feedback on their grammar and spelling. I recently learned that you don't need to use an apostrophe if you're writing 1930s because of deep dives. And it not only says, hey, change it to this, but it it actually doesn't do that. It says, hey, we flagged something. Here's why we flagged it. And you manually have to make that change as a student. So best analogy I have is we are forcing students to go to a writing lab, but they don't need to leave their room, which as we know with today's students, some of them really just don't want to leave their room. And we need to accommodate them, right, as much as we can, and with some, guidelines there. Now back to what we had chatted about with some ChatGPT shortcomings is it is not going to cite valid sources most often. It is going to make things up. Sources, not information, right? So what students do in Packback deep dives is they do research. They're going to copy and paste links from the internet. They might input a textbook. They might input DOI, index number, right? And what we'll do is be able to find this source from the internet or our database, pull it back and give it a credibility score. And we might say, hey, it looks like this is a user-generated content website that might not be very credible. We might say, hey, it looks like this a news website that is prone to bias. Here's our recommendation for maybe finding a stronger source. So not only are we going to tell them why we're finding it either of low or high credibility, but we'll give them some feedback on how to improve in the future or for this given assignment. So this is a great thing. You're going to see this on your end as an instructor. You're going to see what sources were cited and the credibility of the sources. So really great when you're thinking about how can I require more sources, but how can I also not have to Google search every single source for a student? Maybe you can use a tool that does that for you. What I want to make sure is very clear, because I know there's this one student that is definitely going viral on the internet for creating an AI detector. And there are honestly a lot of AI text detectors out there. That's going to be a market we see absolutely explode in the next few months. So here at Packback, what we were able to do was build AI generated content detection that is live for this upcoming term. It's already actively being used in our discussion platform. What that means is it's just another flag that our AI is looking for. So if students do, copy and paste from ChatGPT, we detect use of that. We detect, hey, seems like this was written by AI. We just use the statistical model in reverse. It's kind of brilliant. Students would be flagged and they'd be prompted to edit and resubmit. Now here on deep dives, what you're going to see is there a risk of AI generated content, and is there a risk of plagiarism? And you'll be able to see where exactly we think students are doing good old fashioned plagiarism. And one thing that's important to note is that plagiarism, the way that it existed for years, is easier to prove. Not 100% easy to prove, but it can be proven. What is going to be difficult is to prove AI generated text, right? That is going to be difficult. And so that's been a really hefty discussion online. So I want to pause here, Danyelle, and kind of hear your thoughts. If instructors, get paper one from a student and it's C minus, and all of a sudden they get this paper from a student, it's brilliant and amazing. And they're like, what would your advice be to faculty if they come to you and say, help me, I feel like these two things don't match, and I feel like the student maybe was academically dishonest? What advice would you give instructors?
Right. The first question is, did they actually go to the writing center? Maybe the student actually learned from getting that C and took the right steps and went to the writing center here on campus and did actually write a higher quality paper. So my initial reaction is always give students the benefit of the doubt, right? But the reality is you're absolutely right. Student submits a paper, gets a low grade, the next paper, they're not going to make that same mistake. So let's see what else is out there. And the AI is really difficult to prove, because if it's plagiarized from the internet, you can copy it, paste it into Google, and it's there, word for word, it's there. So you can see exactly where it came from. With the AI generated, like I was talking about earlier, you can have 15 of the same question and get 15 different responses. So you probably can't even replicate that exact same response depending on how you frame your question, right? You'd have to ask the exact same question. And in your account, I believe it knows kind of what you're asking and what you're looking for. So the AI is learning that too. So there's a lot more that goes into an AI generated response. So it's one of those things where you have to bring the student in, you have to have the conversation with them, right? And we hope that in that moment that they're honest. But having tools that have some of that ability to detect it is usually enough. I mean, there's other plagiarism detection softwares out there. And usually when students see the report, like sitting on the faculty member's desk in front of them, they're like, okay, kind of game over, right? I've been caught. So I'm going to have the conversation and figure out if there's a way that I can maybe recover as far as the course. So having something that says the likelihood of this is highly likely sort of opens that same door for the conversation with the student.
To your point, if students know going into the assignment that plagiarism will be reviewed, or their time will be reviewed for plagiarism, and it will be reviewed for use of AI generated text, just knowing that they're being watched, or there
It's a
will be
deterrent.
It's a deterrent. Yeah, it's the same thing when you see, hey, this is being recorded. I'm going to naturally not do anything, a little bit, deviant, because I know that there's that, recording process happening. So that's automatically going to deter. And then, something that's come up in conversation is, number one, ask your university or see if something exists of how should we approach this. And if it doesn't, it is going to fall a little bit on you and your creativity and your own personal beliefs here. But check their sources. See, did they cite some actual real sources? And then where were they actually referencing the sources in the text? And maybe this was just a really good paper. Like you said, maybe they went to the writing lab, or maybe they just spent 5 times more time on it. Maybe they got help from a friend, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. My friend is a copywriter and I ask her all the time for help. And another piece too is look back at the actual assessment itself and ask yourself, did I make this assessment strong enough? And did I make it unique enough? And did I force students to develop their own unique voice? Because maybe if my assignment wasn't doing that, next assignment I will, and I'm going to come back to the student and see what they did. But to your point, I think having conversations with the student is going to be a little bit more present this semester than past semesters. And it's going to challenge us as educators. But again, I think change is good. And I think difficult conversations are good for growth. So on both ends. Absolutely. So I want to talk about experimenting with new types of assignments that require the use of ChatGPT. This has been, I would say, one of the most present questions I've gotten during this webinar series is Packback going to implement some sort of ChatGPT-esque software? And the answer is no, not now. We have our 2023 roadmap set, and it was set before ChatGPT existed. Fortunately, we're able to be nimble as a smaller organization, and we're able to make some small tweaks. But I do think that there are going to be really great assignments that utilize ChatGPT in the next upcoming semester, and we definitely want to be able to document and share those assignments. So here are some early thoughts. First is this concept of finding the right question. So as we had talked a lot about, the better your input, the better the output. And sometimes it takes a few modifications to get the best possible output. So why not ask students to keep iterating on their input or asking for more specific outputs until they get something that they're really proud of and happy that they would consider A, work, and then have them report on all of their queries along the way, and then write a short one-page reflection on the process. That seems like a really great way to get students focused more on asking the right questions. Very appropriate for a Packback assignment, instead of focusing 100% on the product. The process is where things are happening. That's magical. The second idea type was being the reviewer. So having ChatGPT to complete the essay and then ask them to review the output. So go through and correct inaccuracies, go through and maybe weave in content from outside sources and marry those two assignments together. Or it could be, hey, you are a grading assistant in this course. I want you to grade the output and reflect on why you gave it that grade. So there are a lot of great ways you can have students really critically assess a ChatGPT output. And the last piece is outline building. You can either have students build an outline in ChatGPT and then write their paper, or vice versa, build an outline, give the outline to ChatGPT and have it write larger paragraphs. And I think that's a great way to get students to think about, again, the writing process. So I think that'd be great if you were maybe even working in K-12 and thinking how to get my students stronger writers before they're, entering college and maybe not going to have as many resources directly to their writing. So, any other thoughts on this, Danyelle, as we're talking about ways instructors could use ChatGPT?
No, I think that these are kind of the big ones that we're seeing, like theme wise, right? That this is what people are thinking about. How are we either leveraging the tool in one way or another as an output or as an input to then analyze it? Which does it makes students more aware of how it works, and I think really the shortcomings of it, so that they hopefully don't depend on it for assignments. But it is a really cool tool, so it would be a shame to have it go to waste just because we're a little afraid of what students might find if we tell them about it, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, like I'm using it quite often. I'm very rarely using the product it's giving me without heavy editing or heavy thoughtfulness in the query I'm giving it. But it's a little bit hypocritical if any of us are using it heavily and then we don't want our students to use it. So I think that's one thing to think about is like, are we saying I can use it because I'm an adult, you know what I mean? And I'm in my
Right.
career, but you can't throughout the learning process. And similar to, I talk about this a lot in a lot of my chemistry and physics courses. My students had to use TI-89s, the pretty fancy graphing calculators, and in calculus, you have to use them. There are some problems that I was given or I gave that literally could not be solved without the use of a TI-89. And those are
Mhm.
really great assessments. Or there were questions that it didn't matter if I had a TI-89. I had to do all of this on my own. That's kind of the question we can ask ourselves now is what assessments do I build that force the use of generative AI, or what assessments can I build that doesn't even, it doesn't matter? Or what assessments can I build where the students don't want to pick up the calculator to solve the problem?
Mhm.
They want to do it themselves. And I'll end that with a TI-89 is a paperweight for a lot of assignments if students don't know how to use the TI-89. So I'm really excited to see the lesson plans that come out about, instructors teaching students how to use ChatGPT, because I had lesson plans and I was taught how to use a TI-89. I wasn't handed one and then left to run. They're hard to use, really hard to
Yes.
use, right?
Yep.
Especially for those difficult functions. So let's talk about the future. I love the future and I love thinking big picture and getting very creative. I read a lot of science fiction. I watch a lot of Black Mirror. I try to keep it positive though. So ChatGPT is just one example of generative AI, and we are on the very beginning of this journey that is going to be exponential in generative AI. So,
Mhm.
how can you see generative AI serving education initiatives in the future? And I know this is a big question to ask because we're just seeing one instance of it, and it's hard to extrapolate. But do you have any thoughts on this, Danielle?
Absolutely. I think I look at it kind of like the internet, right? When the internet and real web browsing access to everything was made real public, it was the end of education, right? All the students were going to cheat. No one was ever going to have a unique thought ever again. And the internet was going to ruin the world, right? We're sort of in that moment with AI and generative AI, especially right now, that like there's all this potential for it to be used in such bad ways, right? And no
Mhm.
one's ever going to have to think for themselves. Um, but I really believe that this generation of students is very, very critical. They ask the why questions. They ask questions about, why do I have to do this? How does this work? What's in it for me? Right? Like they are very curious as a generation. So I really see this tool being something that they can leverage to help them understand some of the things that we may not be explicitly talking about in higher ed or in school. And I think it's going to become another tool similar to the TI-89, right? That will be in their toolbox, but it doesn't mean that they never will have another original thought again. It's going to be something that they figure out, and we as educators, right, have some form in shaping that, right? We can help to shape that. What does it look like? How can we leverage this to actually be a good thing, to help us work a little smarter, not not harder, right? I'm all about using my brain. I love the creative process. But one of our attendees actually said, not everything needs to be super creative. Some things are just they are what they are. If you're creating a description for something that doesn't need a whole bunch of thought, let the generative AI do that, and you use your brain power to do the creative work, the things that we really need you investing in. So as industry, I see this also becoming something where it can free up employees to do more creative things and to be more, work on more of those passion projects maybe, right? And less on some of the day-to-day things, or, things that maybe don't need as much creativity. So
Yeah.
I
It's
see it
funny.
as opportunity.
I actually wrote a piece that will be published in a few weeks, months. I don't know what the timeline is. I should know this, about AI before chat. I wrote this before ChatGPT, right? They asked me, like, do you want to make any edits? And I said, let's just do something quick because I only have a few hours. But I wrote about the concept of, what if AI could take over all of the tedious activities you have to do as an educator just to be successful as a mediocre educator, right? Things like attendance, things like grading for completions. Like, what do you do in your day as an educator that anybody could do, as long as they, were somewhat competent? I don't want to, belittle it that little, I'm trying to
Yes, yeah.
try to find line here. But what if then all of the time you're saving on the tedious work, because you have AI doing the tedious work for you, you can use to get closer to your students. You spend more time with them, having more authentic conversations. You're giving them more feedback on the parts of their writing that relate to your subject matter and not their sentence structure. And that's going to bring you closer to your students. And I feel like the past few years, there's been a thought that technology is creating distance between us and our students, between educator and student. And what we need to do is start thinking about it. How can it do the opposite? And how am I utilizing technology so that I'm getting closer and closer and closer? And especially after COVID, when we were literally ripped apart physically from our students, how can we get closer? And to the point of generative AI serving us in the future, I think that's one very key piece of it, is that we are able to do less of the tedious and more of the passion, what educators signed up to do. And then we're also able to deliver on learning experiences that maybe could not have existed without it. And I think I shared this with you via email, but the concept of VR, being able to take a student to the surface of another planet, or perhaps generative AI can make really robust role-playing experience happen in situational learning, experiences. If I'm a field student, instead of having to role play with a partner who is not very knowledgeable about something, I could feed ChatGPT or generative AI, I'm gonna use generative AI, all of the information that exists on the topic, and they're knowledgeable just because they're not a human. They can be as knowledgeable on something, right? It can't critically think, but it can generate an output. So there's a lot of really cool things we could do, and I'm excited to see what happens in the next few years. It'll be cool, and let's just prepare our students for it. Let's prepare ourselves for it, and then I'm sure we're going to have some innovators out there, former or current educators, current folks in education, build something really cool with this. Any other final thoughts from you, Danyelle, before we go to Q&A? I want to make sure you're able to maybe share any advice or any kind of just, final words before we transition to questions.
Yeah, I mean, really, I think that just keep an open mind with this. It is something that's a really new technology, and don't be afraid to play with it. It's really hard to break as long as you can get in. So, it's play around with it as an educator, brainstorm, talk to your colleagues, right? That's where some of the best ideas come in, is when we're just talking with each other and having these kind of conversations. So don't stop that.
Absolutely. Well, thanks so much, Danyelle, for all of your help. And if we get any questions that you are honestly going to be way better at answering, I'm gonna send them right to you. But to all folks who joined, thank you so much for joining. The chat has been so explosive with amazing conversation. I'm just so happy to be a part of this community, and glad that we were able to bring people together. And if you are interested in chatting with a Packback team member, curious@packback.co is the email to reach out to. A .co, we are not a .com, which is always is confusing sometimes. And these slides should be public information, and all of these webinars will be on YouTube. So any questions, feel free to throw them in the Q&A or the chat. We'll stay around for a few more minutes. I realize we're at time, but thank you so much, everyone, for joining.